Thousands of farmers from across the country have converged on Westminster to protest Parliament and oppose the changes to inheritance tax laws. The new rules will hit farm estates worth more than £1 million. Farmers say the changes are a betrayal and a stab in the back. But ministers insist they'll close a tax loophole and only affect a small minority of farms. The TV presenter Jeremy Clarkson owns a farm, and he's been one of the most vocal voices calling for a government climb down. Victoria Derbyshire from BBC Newsnight spoke to him at the protest.
So why are you here, Mr. Clarkson?
Well, because I'm here to support farmers.
Right. Are you angry?
It's difficult to be angry on somebody else's behalf. That's like being... Yes, no, I'm not angry on someone else's behalf.
Right. So it's not about you. It's not about your farm and the fact that you bought a farm to avoid inheritance tax.
Classic BBC there. Classic.
Is it?
Oh yeah. It's not the fact that I bought a farm to avoid inheritance tax. The fact.
You told the Sunday Times in 2021 that's why you bought it.
These people.
Sorry?
BBC. Okay, let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
I wanted a shoot. Okay? That's even worse to the BBC. I wanted a shoot, which comes with the benefit of not having to pay inheritance tax. Now I do. But people like me will simply put it in a trust. And so long as I live for 7 years, that's fine. And as my daughter said, you will live for 7 years. You might be in a deep freeze at the end of it, but you will live for 7 years. But it's incredibly time-consuming to have to do that. And why should all these people have to do that? Why should they?
So one of the reasons Rachel Reeves says she brought this in is to stop wealthy people using it as a way of...
No, that was the only reason she did.
Well, no, the other reason was to raise money for public services. Well, have you seen...
Are you listening to this?
Have you tried to get a GP appointment lately?
Yes,
Right.
I just recently had a heart attack.
Okay, so you know it's tough.
Yes.
So where should they get the money from if it's not from farmers?
From farmers.
With
You hear that, everyone?
with
BBC
assets.
thinks you should be paying for everything.
Mr. Clarkson,
Okay, do you
it's
know
not the
how many
BBC's
people
view.
pay inheritance tax in this country?
It's 4% of estates.
What?
4% of estates.
4% pay inheritance tax. 96% of the population of the UK does not pay inheritance tax.
Sure.
After this becomes law, 96% of farmers will.
Where have you got that figure from?
Who here, can I just ask, who here is going to be unaffected by these changes? No one.
Right. Where have you got
I
the
know.
96% figure
Well,
from?
you've got 96%. Well, the same place that Rachel Reeves does, from the middle of her head.
Right.
From the Sixth Form Debating Society that she was no doubt a member of.
Okay.
Which
So-
formed her opinions and yours.
I am not expressing opinions. I'm
Yes.
literally asking you questions. You know that, Mr. Clarkson.
Right.
So, what is your message to this government?
Please back down, please.
And get the money from where?
Well, they've got 40 billion. I'll tell you where you get the... Walk into any of the offices around here. If you don't understand what somebody's job is, fire them.
And how
The civil
far-
service... Civil service is too top, you know that.
Across the country, tenant farmers are having sleepless nights. They worry the land will be sold from beneath their feet. That's not a future that anybody can invest in. This policy has far-reaching impacts. It stops you investing in your farms for the future. It cuts off the ability to deliver the food security message that the Prime Minister said is so important. But most importantly, the human impact of this policy is simply unacceptable. Generations that have worked their socks off to produce the food for this country have been cut off at the knees. They have no ability to plan their way through this. Octogenarians and older that have worked their lifetime producing food for the country have had a bitter, bitter blow. The human impact of this policy is simply unacceptable. The Chancellor says, invest, invest, invest. How many of you have got the confidence to invest in your farms for the future?
As we've been hearing, the National Farmers Union has accused the government of betrayal, but ministers insist the majority of farmers will still have to pay no tax. BBC Verify's Ben Chew has been looking at the numbers.
How many farms will be affected by the changes to inheritance tax in the budget? Well, farming groups are claiming around 70,000 in total, but the Treasury estimates fewer than 500 a year. But there have been reports that the Environment Department, DEFRA, thinks the number might be higher than the Treasury's figure and has been pushing for more mitigations to protect farmers. So what's the reality on these numbers and where do they come from? Well, DEFRA's Farm Business Survey suggests between 30 and 35% of farms in the UK could be valued at over £1 million. There are about 209,000 farm holders in the UK in total, so that implies around 70,000. But all of these would not be necessarily liable for inheritance tax. Let's look at the official Treasury figures for agricultural property tax relief in the 2021-22 tax year. So this gives us a sense of the value of farmland passed between generations in that year. And there were 1,730 claims in total, and only 27% were for properties valued at above £1 million. So that suggests a maximum of around 500 farms which would have been affected by the tax change, which is the origin of the Treasury's figures. So these are the raw numbers, but there's some very important context for them. First, under the changes in the budget, people passing farms on to their descendants would still be facing a lower rate of inheritance tax than people passing on similar assets, 20% versus 40%. And this lower rate will be charged on the value above £1 million, not the total value. In addition, there are various inheritance reliefs, such as those available to married couples, which tax experts estimate could bring the effective tax-free amount for many farmers to more than £2.5 million, not £1 million. Second, some economists argue the value of the inheritance tax exemption for farms, since it was introduced in 1984 under Margaret Thatcher's government, has pushed up the average value of farmland because some wealthy people have used it specifically to avoid inheritance tax, a trend that isn't necessarily financially beneficial to ordinary working farmers. It sparked a lot of opposition in rural communities, but it's that loophole the Treasury was trying to close in the budget.
The BBC's deputy political editor Vicky Young has been speaking to the Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, who says he wants to support farmers. He says he understands their concerns, but insists that the vast majority of farms won't be affected.
I do understand their concerns. What I've pointed out is, firstly, that at the budget we put £5 billion into farming over the next 2 years. That's the single biggest amount of money that's been put into farming, because I want to support our farmers, our sustainability of our food grown in the UK. So we put that amount of money in. We also put money in to deal with flooding and the outbreak of disease, huge concerns for farmers. On the question of inheritance, which is obviously the issue of concern, if you take a typical case, which is parents who want to pass on their farm to one of their children, which would be a very typical example, by the time you've built in the other income tax thresholds, it's only those with assets over £3 million that would begin to pay inheritance tax. And that's why I'm very confident that the vast majority of farms will be totally unaffected by this.
But thousands of them are in Westminster right now, so it sounds like you haven't explained the policy to them.
Well, look, I have support farmers, and that's why we put so much money in. We do have, I think, to go through the detail of this, because I think
you're not changing that policy.
No, but once people appreciate that, in a typical case, it's a £3 million threshold before income tax is paid, then I think most people see the vast majority of farms are therefore exempt. And even those over the threshold are then only subject to a 20% tax over 10 years, or can be paid over 10 years. But look, I also say this, that I know that in rural communities, I grew up in one, we also need really good schools, really good hospitals, and we need houses that people can afford to live in. And they were the measures that we invested heavily in the budget.
The Conservative Party leader Kemi Badenoch addressed farmers at their rally in central London.
This policy is cruel, it is unfair, and it is going to destroy farming as we know it. And that is why we will, at the very first opportunity, reverse the family farms tax. I have here with me Victoria Atkins and Robbie Moore. They are the shadow ministers who are watching what the Department for the Environment, Farming and Rural Affairs is doing. They're watching the Treasury. We are the team that are working for you. We know the burden that farmers are carrying. A lot of people think that farming is just a business. It is not just a business. It is a way of life. It is about family. It is about the land. It is about the environment. It is about our food. We cannot survive without you. I want you to know that we have your backs.
Harvesting an argument, big and small. The essence of this, say the farmers in Westminster today, the next generation, and this.
We've got to change this so that we can pass it down to our daughter and our son so that they can farm or have the opportunity to farm if they want to in the future.
Daughter Evelyn in tow, mum and dad Laura and Robin farm in Nottinghamshire.
That's what it's all about at the end of the day. We're not here to earn money, we're here to pass down.
To sceptics, though, that is seeking to preserve wealth which others can't. Morning, I'm Chris from the BBC. How angry are you?
Fairly angry. I can't say because some words might come out of my mouth that you don't want to hear.
Your debut as a protest, and here you are at the gates of Downing Street.
Yes. I think they should be climbing them, don't you?
Are you tempted?
I would if I was 20 years younger, I probably would.
At the same time, down the road, the National Farmers Union rings its members in for a rallying call. I grab a word with the union's president. Mr Bradshaw, why should farmers be an exception? Others have to pay inheritance tax, why shouldn't you?
Unfortunately, the margins we're making from food production are just so low. On average, it's about 0.5% return on capital. The sense of betrayal, it's not going away.
And how might that step up? Should people be fearful of food not being on the shelves?
I really hope not. We don't want we don't want our consumers to bear the brunt of this. This is an issue with an ill-thought-through government policy.
You're not saying no, though. People will worry about that.
I want to be working with the government on delivering the food security agenda.
Richard's a dairy farmer in Gloucestershire, wearing an argument of the heart as well as a colourful jacket.
My farm, our family started farming there in 1822, and my 13-year-old son was with me. He was with me, milking with me on Saturday morning. I'm sorry,
That's all right.
It's just, I'm part of a long chain that I don't want to see broken.
Back outside, opposition politicians are revealing whose side they're on.
This policy is cruel, it is unfair, and it is going to destroy farming as we know it.
You are feeding our families and you're struggling to feed your own. That is just so wrong.
As for the Prime Minister, the man himself's not here. He's meeting world leaders in Brazil.
Look, I do understand their concerns. What I've pointed out is, firstly, that at the budget we put £5 billion into farming over the next 2 years. That's the single biggest amount of money that's being put into farming because I want to support our farmers.
No farmers, no food.
The government's determined not to give in, insisting the existing system's neither fair nor sustainable, and they need the money for schools and hospitals. And the farmers, well, they are determined too. Chris Mason, BBC News at Westminster.